Amid recent allegations of a Chinese spy ring in Australia, do you think that the Australian government should take effective action to prevent the Chinese government from infiltrating spies into our parliament?
How does this sound from a Middle East perspective, Tamar? I mean, I know China doesn't actually fit very well in Israeli politics.
Yeah,
but,
we have our own problems, but
sure.
listening
we'll
to
come
the
to
panel...
them as well, by the way.
Yeah, I think this is an example of how hostile factors to democracy actually use the mechanism of democracy against it, to go against it. For example, social media. For example, the mere process of elections is suddenly, being inflated with factors that are after our democracies, and I think it's a lesson that all democracies have to learn, why we have to keep ourselves strong, and the idea of the liberal democracy is being challenged, but this is an example why it's still, and maybe even more, needs to be very, very strong against these threats.
Back to different subjects. You're watching Q&A. Tonight we're focusing on international relations. The next question is from Colin Siegel.
We know that if you keep on doing what you've always done, you always get what you've always got. Trump's gut instinct has, amongst other things, benefit the American economy, got more affordable drugs, and got criminal justice reform passed. So could it be that Trump declaring that Jewish settlements on the West Bank are not illegal is actually a smart move?
Tamar, what do you think about that?
I think that the settlements in the West Bank, their existence and the fact that they're not evacuated from there is actually against the interest, first of all, of Israel and Israelis. The settlements are huge, one of the biggest obstacles for peace, and one of the main reasons why we still don't have a viable agreement between Israel and the Palestinians that would ensure a two-state solution and having the two states independently neighboring each other in peace and security. I know that Trump, this is a political, I don't think it has to do with international law. It's a political statement of support in the settlement policy, but actually this policy hurts Israelis and Israeli interests. We have been living for decades now under constant threats of violence. The peace process is being stopped and not taking place anymore. And we see the outcomes as Israelis. We live this reality. Yes, we should solve this in a bilateral talks between Israelis and Palestinians, between two brave leaders deciding to change the course of history towards peace. We also need the help of our international allies and friends, and U.S. Is the biggest one, also with Europe and other countries in our region. Statements like that, they're part of politics, and maybe they're part of the alliance between Israeli right and American right and Republican right. But in the terms of what is the Israeli interest, that would be going back on track of peace talks and reaching a viable agreement rather than keep the conflict alive, and settlements, unfortunately, is part of what keeping the conflict alive.
James Brown.
We have been living in a conflict for over 50 years now. We have two peoples sharing one land. I belong to the Jewish people who got its right of self-determination, by the way, from the UN, recognized by almost all the countries in the world, maybe except Iran. We are right now in military control over another people sharing the same land with us. That's the basic fact, and we need to think how we can solve this. The best way, and we've been living in 50 years of violence around this conflict. Just 2 weeks ago, we saw another violent round in Gaza. I live in Tel Aviv, the biggest city in the center of Israel, and we had alarms to sit in shelters for missiles, and the south of Israel get even more in constant reality. The only way to solve this conflict in a peaceful and secured solution is dividing the land between two states, Israel that already exist and recognized, including our capital in West Jerusalem, and Palestine next to us. And this can be achieved in an agreement, in diplomacy, in talking, not in fighting with each other. We can keep on fighting forever, but we don't want to. We want to change our course into a peaceful and secured solution. We need the help of the world. Of course, we'll have to achieve it, between our leaders in the region. But, going back to the Ottoman and British mandate and history, it helps us understand reality, but we need to better understand the future and look forward, how we solve this conflict. And actually, the solutions are on the table. They are there. We need a brave leadership to pick them up and make them a reality. This is what leaders should do for their...
Let's move on. We'll go back actually to the US election. We've got a question from Ross Mabbott.
With regards to the three impressive women on the tonight's panel, I'm curious to know their views on the race for the US Democratic nomination. There's 4 women contenders, any one of which would make a credible candidate in a normal political landscape. But as we know, in recent years, the landscape in the US it's like a new normal. It's anything but normal. Will we ever see a female US president?
Tamar.
I think we see in the history of the struggle for equality for women, there are always reasons. There are always this particular event and this particular case. And reality is that we didn't have a woman president of the US. In Israel, we had one woman prime minister back in the 70s, and she was known as the only man in the room back then, Golda Meir.
They said similar things about Margaret Thatcher, didn't they?
Right, exactly. So you see how women struggle, and it is a struggle. And, I used to be a chairperson for my party, and before that we had 3 women chair of parties in Israel, and then the next elections we had only 1. The number of women in Israeli parliament actually decreased after a while, after a few terms that it got to less than 30% in a record, number of women. I think we just have to realize, we are half the population. And that means that in order to get equality, we'll have to have a few dozens of women presidents before we go back to men. So we give up on that. Just let's start equality from now on, I think we would settle that. That would be a good compromise. We do struggle. It is harder. You see how women in leadership struggle, how they're being treated. And I think we all can benefit from more diversity between genders, between races, between all kinds of minority groups. I think many in business, people have already saw that bigger diversity on the board, for example, of corporations actually bring better results because you're not, stiff on your thinking and you have diversity around the table. Politics is one of the last places where this lesson is still not sunk in, so we have some work to do.
Samantha. The next question comes from Rayan Kalimlim.
Thanks, Tony. So recent elections across the globe have seen the rise of nationalist strongmen who have been elected on the platform of strengthening their country's place in the world, using often inflammatory and divisive words and actions. Why do you believe these strongmen have become so popular? And does it reflect a broader crisis in our political and social systems?
Well, Tamara, I'll start with you, and you can reflect on the strongman in Israel who may or may not be re-elected and who's facing serious corruption charges simultaneously.
Yeah, we do have a strong man leading the country for 10 years in a row and 13 altogether, who is now being indicted for 3 very severe corruption cases, and actually hasn't been able to form another government for the 2nd time in 1 year. We might go to 3rd elections before very soon. And we see Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I can understand the question because I think he's very similar to many leaders, starting from Trump, going to some leaders in Eastern Europe, in the Philippines, in Brazil. They're all also allies with each other, and they all have kind of a backlash from many of the values that the liberal, human rights supporting democracy has been promoting for the last decades. By the way, leaders from left and right used to promote the same values up until the recent years. where you see some kind of a mix of populist, nationalist leaders trying to withdraw from international coalitions, from values of human rights, of equality, of pluralism, of the liberal democracy. By the way, you see that towards women as well. You see a backlash on feminism, a backlash on gay rights. Many of the values that this wide-spread democracies used to promote are now in a backlash and under attack. And I think that is a challenge towards which the supporters of these values have to unite and be very strong and be very self-assured up against. One of the problems is that the extreme right is very blunt, certain, and that's also like a man style, to be very sure of what you're saying, no matter how, it can be lies or just nonsense. I think the other side of leadership should be the same, have the same self-confidence in our beliefs, because these are the just values. Our values saved lives across the 20th and 21st century, promoted equality for women, for gays, for minorities. So I think we have nothing to be ashamed of, and we have to push back for this both style and policy.
James, thank you very much. James Brown.